Okay, let's quiet down. Let's get to work. So we're going to be talking about the needs and characteristics of living things today. So I want you to go ahead and think about what it means to be alive. What do you think the characteristics and needs of living things are? Okay, nice job with some of the answers. You think it can move, breathe, grow, and develop, has a pulse, made of cells, moving, breathing, able to do anything on its own, responding to its environment, having a pulse, growing and eating water, eating and drinking, having a heartbeat. Good. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these characteristics and needs and see if we can separate some of the stuff out, because some of the stuff you mentioned is good and some of it not every living thing can do. So let's see what the differences are. So when I'm talking, you're not talking, so we can go over the material, right? Awesome. Okay. So organization, all organisms are made of cells. If you're unicellular, you are a single, simple cell on your own. If you're multicellular, it means you are a complex multicellular organism made of many cells. So if you're unicellular, you have one cell on your own, that's it, you're alive. If you have many cells, there's got to be organization to those cells. So let's talk about those real quick. So the basic unit is still the cell. But for you to be large and multicellular, there has to be a lot of coordination. So when you have a lot of cells working together doing the same thing, we call that a tissue. So for example, blood tissue, bone tissue, nerve tissue. There's not a single nerve cell on its own. It's made of a bunch of nerve cells to make a nerve tissue. Beyond the tissue level, you have organs. Organs are things that have lots of different tissue working together. The heart, the brain, the lungs, a kidney. So let's think about the heart for a minute. Yes, it's a muscle. It pumps blood, but it doesn't pump anything without the tissue of blood. So muscle tissue, blood tissue. To be able to make the heart pump, you have to send a signal, so there must be nerve tissue there as well. So different tissues to make an organ. Beyond that, organs are made up of organ systems that work in coordination to help the organism survive. So real quick, what are some of those organ systems? Good. So nice job with that. The nervous system, the digestive system, the integumentary system, the lymphatic system, the muscular system, the skeletal system. And all of those systems work together to make a large multicellular organism. In terms of unicellular organisms, give me some examples. Two types of unicellular organisms. Bacteria, they are considered monerans. They're in the domain prokarya, which means they do not have a nucleus. A nucleus is an organelle within the cell that controls its functions. And it's like an organ. An organelle is considered a tiny organ. So if you know the heart, the brain, the lungs, then organelles are tiny things in the cells. So in any case, the bacteria do not have a nucleus. They are prokaryotes, whereas protists, another type of single-celled organisms, are eukaryotes. They do have a nucleus. And protists are in a kingdom along with plants and animals and fungi that are in separate kingdoms, but they are all in the domain eukarya. So us and all the things that we know have a nuclei in our cells that controls the cellular function. The next characteristic is maintaining homeostasis. And maintaining homeostasis is about regulating balance in the body, keeping things the same. And two excellent examples of this is how we control temperature and how we control water in our bodies. And we do this through feedback systems, which means the body can recognize certain levels of things, and based on that can help to bring things back to a normal balance, a normal range. And so if you're a single-celled organism, the cell membrane is responsible for doing this. In single-celled organisms, you just control what gets in and out of the cell. But in multicellular organisms, you need complex mechanisms because you're trillions of cells big. So let's talk about those systems a bit. So when our temperature is supposed to be at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and so if our temperature gets too hot, we can sweat to cool down. If our temperature drops too low, we can shiver to bring it back up. If our urine is too dark or yellow, it means that we are not releasing too much water because we are dehydrated, and so our body tries to preserve water loss. And if our urine is clear or close to clear, then it means that we have excess water and we're releasing it that way to release the excess water to maintain a homeostatic level of water in the body. Okay, metabolism. Everyone please repeat after me. Metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in the body. All right, so metabolism is the sum of all chemical reactions in the body. And so that's an important term to remember along with homeostasis. Now, there are lots of things that are part of your metabolism. We grow, we develop, we repair cells, we digest, we keep our temperature, right? All these things are part of metabolism. The one that I really want you to focus on right now that I want to talk about is making energy, because all living things need to be able to metabolize and make energy. And so the process by which most organisms make energy is called respiration. Please stop tapping. So when we respirate, we take in the oxygen that we breathe, we take in glucose from the food we eat, and we make cellular energy in the form of ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. And in addition to making ATP, we make carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide is poison, so you get rid of it. Water, even though it's a waste product in this process, we reuse it because water is so important. Okay? So in any case, every living thing metabolizes. It happens in another organelle inside the cells called the mitochondria. And let's talk real quick about how important energy is. Think about the fact that it needs oxygen and glucose from the food you eat to make it happen. How does that tell you that it's a really important process? So energy is so important that we can't go more than a few minutes without breathing oxygen. And so that shows you that, energy is an extremely important process. We do it all the time, even in our sleep, and it's also a part of metabolism. The next characteristic is reproduction. All living organisms reproduce. They do not all make babies. However, they do all produce offspring. There are two types of reproduction, sexual and asexual. Sexual means that two parents are involved in making organisms, and they produce an offspring with great variation, which means the offspring will have a combination of genes from the parents that will produce different traits. And then there's asexual reproduction. When you add the word a in front of a word, it means non. So this means non-sexual, which means it's not two parents, which means it's one parent. If you have only one parent, the organism reproduces by itself and produces a clone. Now, I know that sexual reproduction is what we're most familiar with because that's what most living things we see can do. Asexual reproduction is much more prevalent. First of all, the bacteria you mentioned, they all produce asexually. And so when we think of bacteria, you have more bacteria in your mouth than people on the planet. And so that's how many bacteria are around this world and are reproducing asexually. In addition, even though humans as a whole don't reproduce sexually, we do reproduce asexually in the sense that that's how we got bigger, right? So you all started and I all started as one single fertilized egg, and yet we are trillions of cells big. Where these cells come from? The cells simply divided. They went through the process of making clones of themselves, and here you are trillions of cells later. Now you might be saying, well, why isn't every cell the same then? Because all your cells have all of your genetic information you were born with. But every cell doesn't need to use all of that information. It's like having a giant library of books. You're not interested in reading every single thing, but you might take out a book or two. Well, your cells do the same thing. Your eye cells take out the books for being eyes, and they read that and use that. Your toes take out the book for how to be a toe, right? Your heart takes out the book for how to be a heart cell, and so on and so forth. And so we call that differentiation. Another characteristic of all living things is heredity. All organisms pass traits on their offspring. They do that by using a genetic material called DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. There is another nucleic acid called RNA, which stands for ribonucleic acid. It also is used in some organisms as a genetic material. It is in humans. We use it for our protein synthesis, and other organisms do the same. But in any case, whether you're a multicellular organism or a single-celled organism, you pass on your traits from parent to offspring through sexual or asexual reproduction. And once organisms have those genes, they can have those traits, which are their characteristics. So talk quick moment about some characteristics. So some of your traits or characteristics: eye color, skin color, hair color, height, intelligence to some degree, your organs inside your body, the shape of your nose. All of these things are controlled by these genes, which form your traits or characteristics. Every living thing grows and develops, so you grow larger by adding more cells through that asexual reproduction we talked about. You also develop, which means you change over time. For example, this frog goes from an egg to a larval stage to a tadpole to finally to an adult frog. Butterflies go through metamorphosis, beetles, flies, grasshoppers go through incomplete metamorphosis, which means the young look like the adults. They don't look completely different like in a frog, which goes through complete metamorphosis. In addition, humans, we don't go through metamorphosis, but we certainly go through changes. You start as an infant, then you go through the toddler stage, then you become a child at some point, and then you hit puberty and you're on your way to becoming an adult, right? So we all know about puberty in middle school, and we're certainly going through changes. And you're going to become an adult, and eventually you'll get old like me. All right, so be ready. It happens, even to you guys. Everything responds to stimuli. Yes, responding to stimuli. So a stimulus is a change in the environment, and the response is what you do. So what did you all just do? Stimulus is a change in the environment. Response is what you do. So a lot of people jumped when I made that noise. Their heartbeat is beating faster. They're flushed in the face. Their stomach lurched. All of those things. Responses can be internal or external. You can see the children running from the storm because they see the storm. But you can have internal, like if you get hungry, that's an internal stimulus telling you to go eat, right? So the stimulus would be the hunger, and then the response would be you go get something to eat. So the next characteristic is adaptation through evolution. All organisms change over time. However, evolution does not occur inside the individual organism. None of you can evolve. You're already born with your traits. You already have your traits. However, populations can evolve over time due to environmental pressures. So let's go through a fictitious example to maybe show you what that means. Let's pretend there's no more food in the world. But once a day on this field over here, a pizza appears out of nowhere. We don't know what time. It just appears once a day. Which traits are going to make you most likely to be able to get that pizza? So we said that some things were that if we had a good sense of smell, if we were fast, if we were strong, because one of my students wants to beat people for the pizza. So in any case, the point is that those attributes that would make you more successful eat that pizza would then allow you to pass on those traits to offspring. And so it's likely the offspring would then have those traits. And if you do that over enough generations, over a long enough period of time, those traits become inherent within that population. And that's how evolution happens. All right, go ahead and fill in this sheet. Put the words where they go as a review, and we'll talk about it in a moment. Okay, nice job answering those questions. Let me read the answers for you. So if something is alive, it has several characteristics. The first is that all organisms are made of cells. An organism is either unicellular, meaning one-celled, or multicellular, which means it has more than one cell. All organisms also grow and develop. They not only add more cells, but they change over time. Think of how you are different now than when you were a baby. Living organisms use energy and carry out metabolic or chemical activities, such as digestion. Some organisms use their metabolism to maintain stable internal conditions called homeostasis. Organisms also respond to stimuli. When your stomach is growling, you respond by getting something to eat. All living things evolve as a species by passing on their traits or characteristics to their offspring. Eventually, the circle of life continues as every living thing has a life span. Let's now talk about the needs of all living things. So characteristics are things you have inherently as an organism. Needs are what you need to go get. So all living things need water. Water is considered the universal solvent. Most things will dissolve in the presence of water, and that's why most of our metabolism relies on that. If you didn't know, about 60 to 80% of your body is made of water. That's how important water is to your survival and how much metabolism is going on inside your body. We've talked about the fact that, things like respiration are happening in your body, but digestion, excretion, growing, developing, all those things need water to happen. Reproduction needs water. Digestion, where we break down food, needs water. Water is also considered the most important inorganic compound because it does not contain carbon. Its formula is H2O. So there's some facts about water. Living space. All living things need a place to get food, water, shelter. They need to find a mate. If there are too many organisms in a place and not enough resources, organisms will compete for those resources. And that's how you have evolution happening, right? When organisms compete, those with the strongest traits for that environment will survive. They're not always the ones you think of. It really depends on the environment. There are lots of different environments, so lots of different environmental pressures. All living things also need nutrients. We don't say food because not everything eats. Not everything even, some things, a lot of things make their own food. They're called autotrophs. Auto means by itself, troph means food. They're also called producers because they produce their own food. Plants, bacteria, some protists do this. Heterotrophs are consumers. Hetero means other, troph means food. An organism that eats other things. They are consumers because they consume. If you're a heterotroph, you could be a carnivore, you eat meat. A herbivore, you eat plants. Or an omnivore, you eat plants and animals. So let's talk about these two processes that autotrophs and heterotrophs do. If you're an autotroph, you make your own food by the process of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, you take in carbon dioxide from the air, you take in water from the ground, and you take in sunlight. You then will make glucose, which is a sugar. It's food. And you will also release oxygen as a waste product. Whether you're an autotroph or a heterotroph, you will then use that food. Heterotrophs will eat plants. They will eat other animals that eat plants. Plants will just use the food they made. But plants make more food than they use up. That's why animals can eat plants for food. So how do plants and animals get the energy out of food? We've already talked about this, respiration. You breathe in oxygen. You use the glucose from the food you ate. Or if you're a plant, you just use your glucose. You then make ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is cellular energy. In addition, you create water, which gets reused in most organisms. And you also release carbon dioxide as part of this process. Now, if you're paying attention, you would have heard a lot of similarities between photosynthesis and respiration. They're called reciprocal processes because most of the reactants of one are the products of the other process. And we'll go into more detail on that another time. The last thing all living things need is air. And we say air, it's not that you need all components all the time. If we're talking about respiration, you need the oxygen that's in air. We're talking about photosynthesis, you need the carbon dioxide that's in air. And one thing to think about, there are some organisms considered the earliest organisms on the planet. They're considered extremophiles, living things that live in extreme conditions. They live in places like volcanic vents. They live in hot lava near the ocean floor. They live in hot springs in Yellowstone National Park. And these are early types of bacteria that can use chemicals to live. So they don't use oxygen necessarily or carbon dioxide, they use chemicals. And we call these chemosynthesizers, using chemicals to synthesize what they need. Go ahead and fill the chart in again. Give you a few minutes and we'll go over it, see what you knew as a review. Nice job, all living things All living things have needs or things that must be acquired from their environments. The first is water. It is considered a universal solvent because most things dissolve in water. This makes it very important for most metabolic reactions in the body. You can only live for approximately 7 days without water. Organisms also need to acquire nutrients such as food to make energy and to grow and develop properly. Organisms that make their own food are called autotrophs, while organisms that ingest other organisms are called heterotrophs. Most organisms also need air. Air is a mixture of substances that organisms need to make energy, although some organisms known as extremophiles can live in extreme conditions where no air is present, but this is not true for the majority of organisms. Lastly, organisms need living space, a place to get food, air, shelter, and find a mate. So I want to play one more thing for you, and this is kind of a summary in a video, a little rap tune, and vocabulary for you. And it's not technically completely about the characteristics, but it is about the needs of living things. It also brings a little social lesson for you on the difference between needs and wants. So it's kind of cool.
Needs versus wants. Wants versus needs. What's the difference? I don't know. Maybe I do know. You want to figure it out with me? Yo, hey. Everything you want ain't everything you need. Choices aren't given, gotta use them to succeed. Mama said you can't always have what you want. Shopping with a blind face, can't go beyond. Everything you want ain't everything you need. Choices aren't given, gotta use them to succeed. Mama said it's sometimes I get what I want, but we're shopping on a budget that we can't go beyond. I need something that you have to have to live. That's what water and air. Some other needs a lot of We just learned about me and one. And I just wanted to say, it's okay to get you some things that you want. Treat yourself nice, take yourself out. Self-care, even though you don't need it. As long as it's in the budget.
All right, there it is. Characteristics and needs of living things.